Our country is hungry for positivity and authenticity and storytelling. At the end of the day, humanity is the ultimate connector. Beyond party, beyond geography, beyond socioeconomic terms, we're all united by our humanity.
Welcome to another episode of Chief Influencer. I'm your host, Anthony Schwab, co-founder of Social Driver. Let's face it, Washington is the center of influence in the US and arguably in the world. Chief Influencer features leaders who have figured out how to break through in today's fragmented and fast-changing environment. Social Driver teamed up with the Communications Board and the George Washington University College of Professional Studies to recognize these incredible leaders as chief influencers and highlight how they inspire and influence others. I am thrilled to introduce today's guest, Steve Schwab. Steve is the CEO of the Elizabeth Dole Foundation, the country's preeminent organization focused on leveraging research and innovation to transform the nation's support of its military families. Now, before we dive in, here are 3 things that I think you should know about today's guest. Number 1, Steve is a transformative CEO and what many would call a rainmaker. His track record is really incredible. Steve has raised hundreds of millions of dollars, building highly effective cross-sector coalitions and crafting multidimensional marketing and communication systems and cause-based program models. Number 2, in Washington and across the United States, Steve serves as a powerful voice for the nation's service members and veterans and their caregivers and families. Under his leadership, at a time when few laws were moving forward, Congress passed the Senator Elizabeth Dole 21st Century Veterans Healthcare and Benefits Improvement Act. Such a huge accomplishment. And number 3, Steve is trusted by our country's leaders. He has partnered with Senator Elizabeth Dole to realize her vision for the Elizabeth Dole Foundation. He has enlisted Tom Hanks as the national chair of the Hidden Heroes campaign. And recently he confirmed former VA Secretary and Procter & Gamble Chairman and CEO Robert A. McDonald as the organization's board chairman. Steve has also testified several times before Congress. Steve, you have been called many things, from caregiver advocate to prolific fundraiser, transformational leader, board member, and of course, chief executive. Today, we are thrilled to call you Chief Influencer. Welcome.
Thanks so much, Anthony. I'm so happy to be here.
Steve, I have been really excited for this conversation because you and I met about a decade ago when the Elizabeth Dole Foundation was launching the Hidden Heroes campaign. And I wonder if you just take us back and tell us how all of this got started and where you are today.
Yeah, Anthony, it has been a long time since we met and so much has happened. But when you step back and think about it, this all started with this prolific American public servant woman, hero to many, Elizabeth Dole, discovering a need and recognizing that no one was addressing it. At the peak of the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, Senator Dole was retiring from the Senate and taking care of her World War II hero husband, Senator Bob Dole. You got to distinguish which senator you're talking about because they're both senators.
It doesn't happen too often when you have a senator married to senator.
Right. Yeah. Right. So if they say Senator Elizabeth, Senator Bob, you know which one I'm talking about. So Senator Elizabeth was taking care of Senator Bob at a time in his life where he was struggling with some of the war-related injuries, the compounding issues that aging presented with the injuries that he sustained and almost died from in World War II. So they were in and out of Walter Reed. And this was, again, really at the peak of the longest period of war in U.S. history. And having served in cabinet roles and being at the sides of American presidents, running the American Red Cross, serving in the United States Senate, Elizabeth Dole had a unique view on lots of things. And certainly when she was in Walter Reed, she began to recognize that there was something happening that was different that this country had never confronted. And that was that warriors, veterans, men and women were coming home 20, 30, 40 years old with life-altering wounds, injuries, and illnesses, the kind of injuries we'd never seen in this country ever, because in prior war battles, folks would die from these injuries. But we've advanced so much in the ways that battlefield medicine and protective gear allows for people to survive. But now our country was bringing veterans home who were going to face decades-long recovery. And our system of care, our society, our employers, our healthcare institutions, our communities had never dealt with this before. When folks served in World War II and in Korea and in Vietnam, we didn't see the kinds of folks coming home with emotional and mental wounds, injuries, and illnesses that were going to last a lifetime. And so family members were inheriting a care responsibility that this country had never seen. So Senator Dole discovered a need. And, being a prolific service-minded person, she often talks about her need to have a mission field. It's something I really believe in. And I decided quite consciously in my early life that I wanted to do mission-oriented work, public service work, much like Elizabeth Dole. So she discovered a need. And what she decided to do, and where I came in shortly after, she started to ask questions and procure some research and kind of build some evidence, is we began to build a mission around something that had never been addressed before. And that was this growing army of family members. We call them hidden heroes for a reason. There's millions of them across the country. And we commissioned a study in 2012. Took 2 years for RAND to complete this study. And in 2014, we stood with the Obamas in the East Room of the White House in an incredible bipartisan moment, which still gets me choked up. And we told this country, Democrats, Republicans, Independents, every corner of the country, that there was a crisis happening and that this country, this nation, had a responsibility to the families who served to now serve them. So the new normal in this country, Anthony, is that rehabilitation, wellness, and recovery for a veteran is a family and a community affair. And it means we need to be holistic in the ways that we engage those family members, those communities, those healthcare systems, the employers, all the economic mobility structure around that veteran, so that they're working together to create a pathway to success and financial viability for men and women who protect the thing that we probably take for granted every day, which is this thing called freedom. And so what we've done is we turned that need that Senator Elizabeth Dole recognized into a mission. And now we're building a movement.
Can you talk a little bit about that, the difference between a mission and a movement?
Yeah. So I ask everybody that's listening or watching to step back and think about all the stuff that you're seeing on social media or on TV. You can't turn anywhere these days without hearing somebody talk about a cause or a concern or a worry or an anxiety. And the way that effective cause-based work is built these days is methodically, which means purposefully. And there's both a science and an art to it. The art is the poetry, right? It's the stuff that makes people's hearts sing, the tragic stories of veterans and the wartime challenges that they confronted and the injuries that they're coming home with and the stories of struggle that families have. That's the poetry side. The science side of it is the research, which tells the numbers and the amounts of people who are impacted and how many there are across every state. Movements are built by combining both those things, the art and the science, and by building a coalition of people, influencers, doers, companies, the government sector, and communities all across the country to respond. And so I distinguish missions from movements by folks who do their homework to get to the science of a cause, having defined the art of it, the compelling sort of heart-wrenching side of the cause, and then building the stakeholder groups that you're going to engage and move toward the big mountain. What's the vision? What's the thing we're trying to accomplish? And movements are happening all across America. A movement just elected our new president. Whether you agree with the policies this president puts forward, President Trump built a movement and moved people towards a vision, a set of voters towards winning the highest office in the land. Movements work. Missions are wonderful, but today, truly successful causes, truly successful political campaigns, truly successful product launches are movement-based.
Yeah, and as you put it like that, I think we realize, there's a lot of things that movements maybe have in common with movements over time, but things that make them a little bit different today, which we can talk about in terms of how you're adapting to the new landscape. But it seems like that mission is knowing where you want to go. Like you have the mission to get to the moon, but you got to have that rocket fuel to make the movement to get there. And when I think about the transformative work you've done, we're mostly talking today about the Elizabeth Dole Foundation, but you've done this with other organizations. You're the rocket fuel. I mean, you really figure out a way to get all the right people together to build that coalition. So I want to ask you about that because, you've testified before Congress. You've recruited huge celebrities like Tom Hanks and Savannah Guthrie to join your movement. You've raised millions upon millions of dollars from major corporations and foundations. But then you also speak directly to veterans and to military families. How do you tailor your style of influence to these different audiences?
Yeah, so I believe one of the most important attributes in a leader is authenticity. And so authenticity allows me as a leader to transcend the professional side of my work and the personal side of my work. And I don't think that you can be a successful, passionate, cause-based leader, a movement-based leader, without being comfortable with talking about who you are as an individual, what lights you on fire, what's your rocket fuel, as you rightly said. And also be honest and scientific and deliberative and strategic in the ways that you're a professional leader. In other words, how do you build a structure? How do you translate that passion and that drive and that interest and that heart into a mission that people are going to get behind, companies are going to invest in, that have milestones and measurements? So I think it's a blended approach. And that's why, for folks who follow me online, whether it's on LinkedIn, which is really the sort of the main outlet where I spend a lot of my time, but even on Instagram or Facebook, I'm really comfortable talking about my family and how much I love my 15 nieces and nephews and my 6 brothers and my mom and dad and all of that experience growing up, and the love that surrounded me is what inspired my mission-based orientation as a leader and a professional. And so I don't talk about where I came from in a way that's sort of leveraging something towards an end, right? Or using my upbringing or my family or these beautiful kids that are my nieces and nephews as an asset to get somewhere. I talk about them because they truly inspire me to do the kind of work that I do. They're the rocket fuel that enables me to keep the pace that I'm on because I don't have kids of my own. My family is my backbone, and they've helped inform the kinds of things that I want to do in my life. And they help me be that authentic leader, that empathetic leader who can talk openly with my team and with my community about the way that I'm feeling. There's a lot of change happening in our country right now, Anthony. And some people are really excited about it. And some people are really nervous about it. Some people are really anxious about it. And in a moment like this, being authentic and acknowledging that sort of elephant in the room, or in donkey, in case you're talking about a Democrat or a Republican, gives people comfort. It lets them know that you're a human being. It humanizes you as a leader and individual. And, emotional intelligence and empathy it is really a strength, I think, in leadership and cause-based work. And I think if you're going to call someone a chief influencer, and I'm privileged and honored that you consider me one, empathy and emotional intelligence and authenticity, those got to be necessary ingredients to be truly an influencer, to bring people together, to find more about what we agree on and than what we disagree on, and move people towards a goal.
Absolutely. I love that. I think you're absolutely right. You said earlier, I love the way you put it, poetry and science. Sometimes people say art and science. I love how you said poetry because that is just so much more illustrative. And we hear a lot from leaders. You have to speak to the head and you have to speak to the heart, and you have to do it in a way that is authentic so that it resonates with the gut. I want to maybe hear a little bit about some of the things you've done at the Elizabeth Dole Foundation and with the Hidden Heroes campaign that do that, because I know you have done it so well balancing those. And I'm maybe even thinking about, earlier this fall, I know you had a major event where you launched some new research. And I think that event is a really good example of how you combined the poetry with the science, as you said it. So can you maybe talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, in the nonprofit world, in the cause-based world, and even in the private sector, research isn't a very sexy topic, right? The science side of cause-based work or the science side of business isn't the thing that's going to get people's heart pumping, right? But I talked about how important science and evidence and research is. Senator Dole's talked about this all across her life. It's the reason why she started building this movement, defining the mission before the movement with the science, so that we can understand the scale of the issue, so that we could have evidence that we could point to. And by the way, if we wanted to influence Congress, which we have over and over and over again pretty successfully, Congress loves research. They love facts, and they love fancy research organizations like RAND. And so brand and reputation matter in a place like Washington, D.C. And so we started by going to the gold standard. We think RAND is the gold standard for research. That's nothing against anybody else who does research, but brand mattered in this instance. And we got an endorsement from one of the world's most prolific research organizations. RAND told us how big this issue was, how scaled it was across the country, affecting every state, every neighborhood, every part of the American landscape. And that became an opportunity for us to turn the science into a story. And so when we decided 2 years ago that it was time to update that study, when we did the first study, it said that there was 5.5 million of these families. And I knew 10 years later, after we stood with the Obamas in the White House, that we needed to reconstitute that study and see how we're doing. And the research said that the population has grown threefold, Anthony. Wow. It said that we've gone from 5.5 million of these families to 14.3, almost 15 million Americans across this country and around the world who need vital life-saving support to sustain the health, wellness, and recovery. They're veteran. That's a huge number. And that's inside, by the way, a number that's 100 million plus of Americans who are caring for someone as a caregiver. So 1/3 of our country is in the business of caregiving. You either are or will be a caregiver someday. Very few issues in American life that touch almost every American family. That's what the facts say. We brought our constituents together this fall and we convened, thousands of folks at Amazon's global headquarters here in DC, this really cool office, which maybe added a little bit of sexy quality because people really wanted to see this new cool place. And it is amazing. And Amazon was amazing to invite us in. We were able to tell a story. We were able to put people on stage who were representative of that research. We were able to bring leaders, Senator Duckworth and Tillis from Capitol Hill, Senator Duckworth having lost limbs due to her service, and Senator Tillis representing one of the most military populous states in the country in North Carolina. And they could talk in a very personal basis about how the science translates to poetry and to stories and to real life drama. And I use that word drama because drama compels people to do something. And so I often say to my colleagues who say, does it feel weird to ask your community to get up and tell their stories, or to put people in the position who are maybe suffering or challenged to stand up and say, hey, I need help? And I say, absolutely not, because how else are you going to get past all the other things that are coming at people, all the things that folks are asking for support for, be it natural disasters or to give blood or pet welfare, kids who are suffering from cancer, all really important causes. But we got to distinguish ourselves from the rest. In as much as we're nonprofits, this is a competition, Anthony, right? It's a competition for influence, attention, and resources. So we have an opportunity to bring folks together and tell them about the facts. We got to put on a good show. And so that's what we did. It's a show. And I don't say that in a sort of symbolic or artificial way. I say that because that was a tool to gain the resources and the partners that we need eventually to sustain our movement over time. The ultimate goal is to make sure this movement is here forever. I want this organization, my legacy, Elizabeth Dole's, is that this organization becomes as important as the American Legion and the VFW have been, and Wounded Warrior Project is, to veterans. Those organizations you think of as having little outlets. The VFW posts and the American Legion posts are in most neighborhoods all across the country, right? We need the same thing for military and veteran families. That's what I want the Elizabeth Dole Foundation to do. It's what Elizabeth Dole envisions. And so, everything's got to be on the table in terms of the ways that we influence and move people to take action.
Yeah. I love that. As you talk about the storytelling that's important, I want to dive in on some things you do specifically at the foundation, because I think anybody who's raising money or pursuing a cause, they all know that storytelling is important. But what I've observed is sometimes folks will go about putting their plans together, doing their work, and then almost like an afterthought, they'll go, oh, who can we get to share this thing we did to reach people? And when I look at what you all have done, you've taken a really different approach because you've embedded the people who you exist to support directly into your work through the Dole Caregiver Fellows, as one example. It's not just, oh, by the way, once we did this, hey, can we go find some caregivers to tell our story? You have a whole program that occurs on an ongoing basis with new classes of these fellows that you bring together so that they're really part of your DNA. They're part of your family. And those are often the people who are standing up telling these powerful stories. So can you talk a little, because to me, that is a different philosophy from what I see from many organizations, whether it's a corporate brand that's trying to get somebody to promote a new product or whether it's a nonprofit. I just don't always see that philosophy of building that in so deeply. And I think it's really special.
Yeah, Anthony, it's a great question. This goes back to those core elements of what's going to translate and move a mission into a movement. And these are all lessons that you can use in the cause-based and nonprofit environment or in the private sector when you're launching a new product. And so you go back 10 years to when we were starting, and it was basically, I was a consultant at the time, and Senator Dole and I, and maybe an intern or two, in a cubbyhole office at the Watergate where we were donated space. And we were lucky for it to really begin to build the plan that was going to shape this mission and ultimately fuel a movement. And we recognized that we're pretty resource poor at that point. So how are you going to build when we have the science that says it's a nationwide effort, you don't have the resources right away to build a nationwide staff? Well, we said, we're going to find and identify and recruit fellows, folks who are military and veteran caregivers who are providing this care day in and day out to their families. And we developed basically a field effort. It's like a field campaign, which says we're going to recruit folks who are willing to raise their hands and share their story. And we're going to empower them with the resources that we had, with the training and the tools to become advocates, ambassadors, and doers in all 50 states across the country. And we launched a fellows program, which was transformative for us in engaging civic organizations and media organizations and businesses at every level, at the national, state, and local level across all 50 states. And I don't think we knew at the time how big that was going to be for us. This program is really the heart and soul of who we are. It fuels our mission evolution, our storytelling. They go to Capitol Hill several times a year. They were instrumental in us passing this incredible historic legislative package that we did this last year. And they are our boots on the ground. Our staff has grown pretty substantially over the last few years, certainly carefully and incrementally. We could not do our work without recognizing that the community we serve needed to be built into the movement from the very beginning. Goes back to authenticity, goes back to effectively telling stories, goes back to leveraging science into poetry. And they're the best ones. They're better than me, better than Elizabeth Dole in telling this country what they ought to do to support this community. And we're blessed for it.
I love that. I think that it's so important for folks to hear that. Well, one, it started out of necessity. It sounds like a little bit, and it's become such an important part of your work. So that's pretty cool. But if somebody's just like, oh, now we have this thing to talk about, how do we come up with a transactional way to get people to talk about our stuff? It just doesn't work that way. It takes that time and effort to build those relationships. You talked about authenticity. You talked about the importance of those connections. And I think that that's really important for all of us to hear, because, hey, if we have something coming up, we might need to get started. If we're not doing that, we better get started on it, because it takes that time and investment to develop that powerful resource that you have.
Yeah. And Anthony, we are, whether you're Democrat or Republican or don't identify with any party, and all too often in this country, and certainly in Washington, D.C., we're defining things by red or blue, which isn't really the way this country was built. It's a divisive period in the history of this country. No one on either side is going to debate that. So our country is hungry for positivity and authenticity and storytelling. At the end of the day, humanity is the ultimate connector. Beyond party, beyond geography, beyond socioeconomic terms, we're all united by our humanity. And my counsel to folks who are building causes or movements or products, companies, is to strip it way down and define what is the core impact that you want to deliver. Sort of in the nonprofit industry, the common product for every nonprofit is impact. Whether you're Elizabeth Dole Foundation or the Trevor Project or Wounded Warrior Project or the Red Cross, we all deliver impact in different ways. We all define our story differently. And if you can distinguish what makes you different, you can build authentic ambassadors and storytellers and deliverers of that message and deploy them effectively. You can build multidimensional coalitions of support and distinguish yourself from the pack. But it's really, really important to recognize the divisive time we are in this country right now, and that people are hungry for things that unite us and bring us together.
Well, 100%. And as you talk about the divisive time, it's been tough to get laws passed. And you had a big win last year when Congress passed, the president signed, the Senator Elizabeth Dole 21st Century Veterans Healthcare and Benefits Improvement Act. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how you influence stakeholders specifically when you're trying to change public policy.
Yeah. Well, I've got some really important lessons. And the biggest one is never give up, because it took nearly 3 cycles of Congress to get traction and eventually pass this bill.
Even for a former senator.
Even for a former senator who, by the way, one of the advantages of having a former senator as your founder, and Senator and I probably did over 600 to 700 personal visits to members of the Hill across those 3 years. Elizabeth Dole was literally going door to door on Capitol Hill. I was by her side. We usually had a caregiver fellow with us. Imagine for a moment that this prolific American public servant was doing what every other American citizen has to do to get a bill passed. You got to put the work in. You got to develop a robust, direct effort, a field campaign like we did with the fellows, where the storytelling becomes important. But then you got to deploy and knock on doors on Capitol Hill. And by the way, One Congress, we passed the House, another Congress, we passed the Senate. And it didn't get support on the other side because sometimes one house agrees on a set of principles and the House and the Senate have different ways of thinking, and then the eventual bill doesn't get passed. A lot of folks give up and walk away and say this isn't going to happen. And so we have the lessons of history that Elizabeth Dole has learned. I've been in the business long enough to realize, as the folks on my team, we've got a great Hill and policy team here, that you got to keep biting at the apple, and you got to build a coalition. We didn't do this by ourselves. We had groups like the Paralyzed Veterans of America, Military Officers Association, TAPS, the Tragedy Assistance Program for Survivors, AARP, some behemoth organizations with a lot of influence. So, we would have been the front woman here was Elizabeth Dole. But we had an army of folks behind us who were knocking on doors with us, knocking on doors separately with us, activating their constituents to call folks, to send letters, to post on social media. And ultimately, I'd say at a time when Congress doesn't have a very high approval rating, I mean, really, there's probably virtually no entity in America that has a lower approval rating than Congress. And that's because of not a lot is getting done in this divisive time. My counsel to folks is all too often we put the whole cabana on the table and say, this is the thing that we want to accomplish. And instead of doing that, we said, we're going to put the thing on the table that we think mostly everybody agrees on is able to be accomplished. Democrats and Republicans can probably agree that this component of military family health is going to work. And we did that. And once we got people around the table that agreed on that, then we began to layer on the other pieces, increasingly getting to the more divisive elements of the bill so that those things weren't on the table, right away, Anthony, and people didn't put up their borders and their walls at the outset. Something I really deeply believe in. And Senator Dole has taught me that she and her husband practice all throughout their politics. And President Reagan used to say to her, take one bite and come back in, and you get people in once they agree on what that first bite at the apple is. Yeah. It's a principle that I'll continue to use, and I think anybody who wants to get Congress to take action really needs to think about.
This episode is brought to you by the George Washington University's College of Professional Studies. With in-person and online programs ranging from master's degrees in public relations strategy to certificate programs in digital communications, GW offers more than just the credentials to help working professionals get ahead. It prepares them to be leaders in their field. I'm a proud GW graduate myself, and I can attest that the faculty members combine academic rigor with real-world lessons that can't always be found in textbooks. Check out cps.gwu.edu for more information. I love that. Now, real quick, since we talk a lot about process and chief influencer, how you get these things done, I just want to make sure folks understand the impact of what you actually achieved with this law. So can you just tell us, what's the outcome for the people that you represent?
Yeah, in a nutshell, the system of care, VA and DOD, but primarily VA, was built to support care that is delivered in a clinical setting. So veterans come to a facility, they receive their care, and they go home. Everything has changed, even in civilian medicine. And this really is going to be a model for the way that hospitals and healthcare institutions across the country function. And that is to divert a whole lot more of our resources and investments into technology, clinical practices, and processes that encourage the development and innovation of in-home care delivery, remote access, electronic health record systems that allow caregivers and family members to engage remotely and with providers and to seamlessly carry records from the DoD side to the VA side. This bill also allows organizations like ours, for the first time in history, to become endorsed advocates for people inside the healthcare system. We've been able to do that for decades for veterans for their benefits under the veterans benefit structure. Now, organizations are going to be able to advocate for better healthcare. So when someone can't get in to see a doctor, the Elizabeth Dole Foundation is going to be able to go and advocate for Joe Smith in Nebraska to get his doctor's appointment or his mental health appointment. At times when we're hearing about how access is an issue, this bill is also going to increase the availability of care when veterans need it. So if there's not care available at the VA and there is in the community that they live in, well, we're going to give them access to that community care model. And that's not a threat to the safety and security of the public health care that VA gets and that most veterans love. It's giving them access to care where and when they need it. It also improves mental health support for families and respite care. It creates innovation around the ways that we deliver that care across the system. It's a mammoth bill, but primarily the biggest theme is it's going to allow VA to recognize and recalibrate the ways that it's interacting and delivering care in a world where it's not being done entirely and mostly in a clinic.
Yeah. I love, thank you for just unpacking it, because it is a huge deal. It is a major lifeline for these families to be able to get care when you need it, where you need it, to have somebody be able to advocate for you. It's a really huge achievement. Congratulations to you. Congratulations to your whole team. And when we think about how you got there, I know that you talked about the many partners you enlisted, all of whom have a number of other priorities too, right? But you got them on board. And you've also really done a great job of enlisting a whole who's who of big names from the worlds of media, entertainment, politics. I mean, all these names that every American has heard of. I want to ask you, Steve, these are people who get bombarded with requests to sign on to things, to show up for things, to do things. And you are so effective at getting them to say yes. What is your secret?
I think my secret is going to people with the right thing at the right time. I'm a big believer. I've talked a lot about authenticity and passion. I often talk about my passion meter. When I hire someone, the last gut check I have is how passionate do I think this person, this individual is for the mission that we're engaged in. If someone doesn't have a passion for what we do, then they're really not going to be inspired to get involved. That's also true of people you want to engage in your mission. Yeah. A lot of folks are really obsessed in the cause world with finding, recruiting, and identifying ambassadors because they think star power is a means to an end, right? By getting, Susie Smith, the biggest celebrity in the world, it's going to amplify what we do. I don't think that's right. Unless Susie Smith or Tom Hanks or Savannah Guthrie or Ainsley Earnhardt from Fox News or Adam Driver have reasons in their life, authentic reasons that drive their passion around a cause like this. In Tom's case, Tom is one of this country's most prolific and passionate storytellers about military service. Band of Brothers, one of the most incredible, the Pacific, Saving Private Ryan, Forrest Gump. Tom partnered with Bob Dole to raise the money, hundreds of millions of dollars necessary to build the World War II memorial. So Tom's connection to this cause was authentic. And when we had gotten far enough along, it wasn't early, we had gotten the science and we recruited a coalition, and we were at an inflection point where Tom's involvement was going to be clear and make a difference. And there were things that he could understand and that were realistic for him to do. We went in and he said to Senator Dole and I, I'm in it for life. Tell me what I got to do and I'll do it. It was similar with Savannah and Ainsley. In Savannah's case, her family is served, and Savannah has great admiration and passion for service and for the faith connection that many people in our military and veteran community have, as does Ainsley Earnhardt, who herself is a person of faith like Savannah. And one of the characteristics of the community I serve is, and the science says this, is that veterans and military family members consider their faith a really, really important part of their life and often turn to people in the faith community as much as they do clinicians and doctors and other folks. And faith has become too political in this country. And it really shouldn't be, because people express their faith in different ways. I grew up And my faith, a really important part of what I do. I don't talk about it maybe as much as a lot of folks do, but it is important nonetheless. And I think faith can be another uniting characteristic where we can meet people where they are. And in this case, it inspired Savannah and Ainsley to get engaged. And so it's the identification of authentic ambassadors who, by the way, if Tom, Savannah, and Ainsley uh, um, hadn't got engaged, Jocko Sims, who's one of our longest time passionate ambassadors, if they didn't have a heart for what we do, they wouldn't be doing it. I might get an event or two out of them, Anthony. They might come do an event for us and walk away and we never hear from them again. The ambassadors we're talking about, and you've been at a lot of these events, they're with us for the long haul. They're more in the business of saying yes than they are no, because it's the authentic connection. They believe about it. They're passionate about it. And we're being careful about the things that we ask them to do, because when they get engaged, they're making a real difference in the mission and the movement.
I'm so glad that you talked about that, Steve, because I think just like we talked earlier about the fact that you might, wait till you do something and then go ask if, regular people will share it. I think that happens a lot with celebrities as well, that people like you described, they just think, oh, I want to get the star power. And they don't really think about, you need to find somebody that has that authentic connection. And that's a lot harder to find. It's a lot harder to activate, but you get that long-term result that you described, and it makes such a difference. And I hope leaders or communicators listening who might be thinking about their own opportunities to work with, major influential figures really take that to heart. I think it's such a great lesson.
Yeah. And by the way, for those who are interested in causes, and you go to a cause and you see 1,000 names, challenge yourself to go a little deeper and see where there are causes who have those authentic connections with people who believe in them. I'll bet that those are the causes that are actually making a real difference in the lives of the communities they serve.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, speaking of influencers, you have quite a LinkedIn following, Mr. Schwab. You are what I would call a power user. I mean, you post a lot. You do a great job. You follow the best practices we talk about because you're tagging people, you're using photos, you're telling great stories. And I know it's really you behind the curtain. This is not, something that you just watch somebody else do for you. You are intimately involved. You are commenting. What do you say to another CEO who says, Steve, I don't have time for LinkedIn?
I say to that CEO, take a look at my calendar, which, I think today is this interview is my 7th meeting of the day. And I'll challenge any CEO, and we all got different levels of responsibilities. My organization may be smaller than some and bigger than others. There is always time to do what I believe is a responsibility as a leader, and that's to communicate to my stakeholders that I'm actually doing what I need to do to build my movement, to thank my stakeholders and my partners, to call people out when they should be called out, and to be authentic in identifying my leadership qualities and my leadership profile and the activities that I'm doing in my daily life to do this work. And so my LinkedIn profile is an opportunity for me to feature great stories of the work that's being done behind the scenes by my incredibly dedicated partners. Listen, there is a difference, and many of our partners have said this about EDF. We truly build authentic partnerships, which means we don't just take money from a company. Today we were meeting with Leidos, a huge company in this nation. If you walk through any airport security lane, you go through the big Leidos security markers. They also do a lot of mental health work for military families, and we're going to pilot a big mental health program for 50 families to figure out how we can bring more and better healthcare, mental health care to military and veteran caregivers. And Leidos is a big supporter of ours, but you see that support is not leading to me just slapping their brand on a LinkedIn post. Instead, I'm able to tell a story about how Leidos is making a difference in the course and the life of the people that we serve. And that serves as an example on LinkedIn, one, for the kind of style of leader I am and the kind of partnerships that we build, but also the kinds of companies like Leidos and Lockheed Martin and USA and Hilton, the Bob and Dolores Hope Foundation, a transformative philanthropic organization based on the legacy of Bob Hope, led by Linda Hope and Tony Montaldo and Bob and Dolores Hope. Bob told stories and entertained troops in all corners of this world. And I'm able to talk about the legacy that he built and how it's being translated now today by his daughter and this board into transformative philanthropic investments in organizations like mine, so that we can maybe feel nostalgic like we did at the times when Bob Hope was alive. So LinkedIn, I'll tell you a quick story, Anthony. And these are the sort of the informal ways that I use LinkedIn. I certainly post about the meetings that I'm in and the conferences that I go to. But last fall, I saw catalytic philanthropic leader Michael Bloomberg make a historic investment in HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities. And this, by the way, is a great lesson on how you use LinkedIn to appeal to audiences and to segments that aren't maybe necessarily totally aligned with your mission-based work. And this is how I use LinkedIn a lot, is I lift up and think about, I live in the world of philanthropy, and as much as I do military and veteran caregivers and healthcare, and when I see a big philanthropist like Mike Bloomberg make a catalytic investment, I share it on my LinkedIn and I tag him and his team and say, look at what this great philanthropist is doing. And I got engagement from Mike Bloomberg and from his CEO and from the team. And all of a sudden, one of the biggest foundations in America is starting to look at what we do and how we impact lives. And now we're beginning conversations about how we might work together. And that was through challenging myself, as I do every day, to look on LinkedIn when I'm on an airplane or when I'm laying in bed at night before I fall asleep, or I'm in an Uber between engagements, and looking for opportunities for me to celebrate what my partners are doing, whether it's Lockheed making investments in disasters, or USAA investing in emergency responses, or Reach Resilience and Endeavors doing transformational work all across this country. Folks are surprised when you take a moment and thank them, because we don't do enough of that in this country. But it's just who I am. It's my authentic self. And it's okay to bring that authenticity, that personality to LinkedIn, because I think a lot of people recognize that I do that a little differently than others. And it's worked. It really has.
I love that. And one of the things that you hit on is, some leaders say, well, I don't want to just use LinkedIn and talk about myself. And often, I'll say, well, you don't have to talk about yourself. You can actually use it to uplift other people. And that's exactly what you do. And that's exactly what you shared in those examples. And I know that, you have a meeting with a partner and they're going to be highlighted on LinkedIn, and it's going to be about them and the great meeting you had. And it's centered around the other person.
Yeah. And it's okay to talk about yourself. It really is. We should be comfortable doing that. But I think if you look at my profile, most of the time it's featuring what we do and who we are and who our partners on. But don't shy away from, promoting a great achievement. Yes. Or, I just got into Duke for an executive master's program, and I celebrated that achievement and put it on my LinkedIn. That's an opportunity for me to say to my partners, look what I'm doing for myself, to evolve myself as a leader, to make myself better for the future. And there's ways you can do that humbly and authentically. Without feeling like you're self-promoting.
Yes, absolutely. What a great lesson. I want to also just give you a chance to talk about, we've been talking about this kind of last decade of work that you've done, but more recently, there's another coalition that you all have really launched, and you're taking it to the next level. And I just want to make sure that folks know about Face the Fight.
Yeah, Face the Fight is a groundbreaking initiative that is led by the private sector, and that the Elizabeth Dole Foundation is privileged to be fueling the growth of the coalition around. USAA is the founding partner. We recruited Reach Resilience, a foundation associated with Endeavors, and the Humana Foundation to invest in recruiting organizations all across the country into a coordinated effort that builds philanthropic resources to cut veteran suicide in half by 2030. Suicide is an epidemic facing our country generally. And inside the MilVet population, the situation is much worse. We'll lose many military connected people in the course of the time, Anthony, that you and I have just spent together today to suicide. And it's much higher than the civilian rate of suicide. Neither are acceptable. And USAA took a big risk. They're a financial services company who certainly supports the military and veteran community, but they said enough is enough. Let's bring more catalytic members of the private sector. Let's bring more innovators like Starbucks and Walmart and Fox Corporation and Lockheed Martin. And certainly Humana that's made big investments, Reach Resilience. So private foundations and corporations who are helping us make a difference in developing new real ways to address this epidemic, to talk about things like safe storage and how we need to give, like when someone puts a seatbelt on in the car, we need to create a habit that when someone buys a firearm, they buy a safe to put that firearm in. So when it's in the house, the leading cause of death amongst veterans is a loose firearm at a moment where they may have a manic episode or an acute mental health episode. They reach for that firearm and they make a decision that is life-ending. And so there are ways it's preventable. The only good news here is that it is preventable. It's really hard, and it's really difficult work. And we've built a coalition of the willing, including a lot of NGOs and nonprofits who've been at this for a long time, to swim in the same direction, to come together, and to make investments. The philanthropic dollars we're raising are going back to the organizations who are making the biggest difference to end veteran suicide. It's life-changing work, Anthony, yeah. And we got to thank USAA and Reach Resilience and the Humana Foundation for taking a risk, and the others who are coming alongside us to make it possible to end this epidemic.
Yeah, absolutely. Very important. And I just think it's pretty amazing what you all are doing through Hidden Heroes, and now the powerful work that you're doing to expand that impact for the veteran and military community through Face the Fight. So thanks for sharing about it. Last thing I want to ask you about, Steve, is just, you have had the opportunity to work with your boss, Senator Elizabeth Dole, and her late husband, Senator Bob Dole. And I wonder if you could share any of the lessons that you've learned from them.
Yeah, thank you for asking that, because, they don't make public servants like Bob and Elizabeth Dole anymore. It's sad. And I hope that the pendulum's going to swing and that we're going to see that purity and nobility of public service return. It's what inspired me to do the work that I do every day. And it's real with Elizabeth Dole and Bob Dole. We lost him a couple years ago. There's a reason the two of them found each other. I talked a lot about authenticity, faith, something that drives her mission work every day, family, selflessness. And this is a woman, by the way, who at 89 years old, may be on her treadmill right now, which is something she does regularly, or getting ready to go out to dinner, which she does several times a week, or knocking on the door of someone in Capitol Hill. She's taught me that the key to health and vitality is to having a mission, a purpose. And that doesn't mean that you shouldn't retire or take a break. But in doing so, what's the thing that you're rededicating yourself that's going to fuel your health and your vitality and your brain and your body? It's bigger than yourself. And so I ask people to think about that. What's the thing that you're taking on that is bigger than you, that you're trying to solve? It can be big or small. It could be something with your family. So I've learned that that's really important from her. I've also learned that as busy as she gets, that you got to make time for yourself. Senator Dole does quiet time a couple times a day. It's contemplative, prayerful, meditative time where she can spend a little bit of time on her own, kind of organizing herself and making sure she stays in the driver's seat in the course of a busy day. Something I do every Sunday night before I start my week is some quiet time where I build the things I want to accomplish over the course of this week? What are the things that are going to drive us as an organization by next Friday, instead of doing what a lot of people do, Anthony, and starting it on a Monday and just being barraged by your emails and your calendar? We're all in reactive mode. You got to put yourself in the driver's seat. So take time throughout the day. I do yoga 3 to 5 times a week, mostly 5 times a week. It's changed my life. I do it in the mornings before I get started with my day. Sometimes I do it at night as well. And that drove me to taking that contemplative time on Sundays to create my list. And then I send it out to my 3 chiefs, the folks who are senior leaders in my organization, to say, here's where I'm going into this week. Important for them to see and then recognize how they can support me and develop their own sort of driving, influencing agenda for the week. And all those are things that I learned: integrity, honesty, authenticity, purity, and selflessness from Elizabeth Dole. By the way, in addition to being one of the nicest people I've ever met, I don't think I've ever heard her say anything bad about someone. One of the sharpest political minds, tactically and strategically, of anybody I've ever met. And she can do it in a way that is positive and uplifting. Don't get me wrong. She can also figure out how to get around someone who's creating a barrier or a block, or undercut someone who's undermining her, but in a way that lifts people up and keeps people united. It's really inspiring, and I've been doing this work for 11 years because of her. Certainly because of her and because of the community that we serve, but she is certainly a big reason why.
Thank you for sharing that, and thank you also for sharing some of your personal tips and how you apply it to your quiet time at the end of the week for planning, sharing that with your team, the yoga, because I think it's just, a lot of times leaders don't share those things, and I think it's really important for folks to hear what works for them. You also talked about being in the driver's seat, and I would be remiss if I did not say that, we just feel so privileged at Social Driver that we've had the opportunity. You trusted us 10 years ago to come on board and help you. And, we've been able to work with you for now a decade on things ranging from websites to communications campaigns and everything in between. And we're just really grateful to be a small part of this mission and this movement.
Well, you guys are a big part of it. And I might have chosen that word driver for a reason. But we've grown our work together because you're so good at it, Anthony. And we appreciate the growing body of work that you do to help us influence and move people to take action. Ultimately, that's what's going to change the game for the millions of people that we serve. You got to have a means to the end. You got to have a story. You got to have that mountain that you're moving towards, and the science and the poetry to get there. And y'all have helped us do that.
Well, thank you. Thank you for saying that and being such a great partner to us. As we wrap up, this was such an incredible conversation. I'm so grateful for you making time to share with us. And, one of the things you said at the end was that Senator Dole taught you the key to health and vitality is to have a mission and know what that mission is that's greater than you. And in today's conversation, you really talked a lot about how you shape that mission, as well as how you fuel the movement that gets you there. And some of the themes that really jumped out at me, Steve, were translating science into poetry, the importance of finding that balance and doing that through storytelling, of course, but really authentic storytelling, whether that's Steve sharing his own experience, your own experience on LinkedIn, digitally, or on stage as you do so eloquently, but also building a movement of others to tell their own stories, which you started by necessity, we learned, with the Dole Caregiver Fellows when you were just, starting out without a large team. And as your team has grown, that army of Caregiver Fellows has grown. So you have these ambassadors across the United States, not to mention these major influencer ambassadors that aren't just doing it transactionally, that are there for the long haul, like Tom Hanks, Savannah Guthrie, and the others who you mentioned. It also just stuck with me that, as you worked through multiple congresses, multiple sessions, multiple congresses, as we say in DC, to get the act passed that got passed last year. Never give up. You have to persist. And you and Senator Dole were knocking on doors and pounding the pavement on Capitol Hill with hundreds of meetings to make that happen. And we really can't give up when something is important to us, when it's that mission that is key to our health and vitality that's bigger than us. And then the last thing that jumped out at me is just the critical importance of building coalitions and understanding what motivates your people, making sure that you honor that. And you have a responsibility as a leader to communicate with them, which is one of the reasons that you show up on LinkedIn, and that it's just really powerful when we see how you show up, Steve, and when we hear how you do it. So thank you for showing up today. Thank you for sharing your story with us. And thank you so much for the important work that you do.
Thanks so much for the opportunity, Anthony. This is really fun.
Chief Influencer is a production of Social Driver. We help clients transform complexity into clarity with people-centered strategies. Whether you're looking to elevate the influence of your brand or of your leaders, check out socialdriver.com to learn more. For show notes or to nominate a guest, visit us at chiefinfluencer.org or follow Chief Influencer on LinkedIn.